With this now being the 6th video on a Pokemon character in Smash, it's quite apparent that members of that franchise are struggling to garner a consistent following in the competitive scene, even if from a statistical point of view they're objectively good characters. I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that every Pokemon is characterized by a niche playstyle that comes across as gimmicky, with some coincidentally having practical merit like Pikachu, Greninja, and Pokemon Trainer. The same can't be said for our pink balloon though. No, not that one, that's a pink marshmallow according to Snake. There we go, much better. Jigglypuff. To say that Jigglypuff's representation is sparse would be an understatement. The only players that come to mind that draw international attention are Senra in the east and Base Mage and Hungrybox in the west, and even then, the cause of H-Box's attention has less to do with his competitive performance and more with his legacy and personality, although lately he's really stepped things up in Ultimate. In stark contrast to her prime in Melee, she's been a perennial low, if not bottom tier character in every installment that followed up until Ultimate, where she's a mid tier, but still a shadow of her former glory. So in today's episode of Why No One Plays, we're gonna break down what holds her and has been holding her back for the past 20-something years. Polarity. Polarity is the best way to describe Jigglypuff. While Little Mac is a polarizing character from ground to air, Jigglypuff is a polarizing character from air to ground. Granted, it's not as egregious of a trade-off. She has a few options to make use of on solid ground, but as an identity, that's how most people would describe her. Fighters in high and top tier usually display adequate proficiency in both ground and air combat, even if one might be better than the other, because part of the dynamic of Smash is how well you can transition to and from each position. That said, being a platform fighter instead of a traditional one, more emphasis is placed on a character's position relative to their opponent, and with the central win condition entailing a ring out, that is, knocking your opponent off the arena hard enough to where they either fall out of bounds or can't make it back, aptitude in aerial combat usually takes precedence over ground, since there's only so much ground space but there's plenty of air space. One would think this would allow for a very comfortable environment for a floaty balloon like Jigglypuff to find success in, and it did, at least for a time. What allowed Puff to excel in Melee was that very aspect. She had the best combination of air physics and was exceptionally difficult to challenge head-on by the majority of the cast. Universal movement options in Melee were very ground-centric, like wave dashing. Furthermore, across-the-board recoveries were far less effective than they are today. That's partly why they play with 4 stocks in competitive Melee, since 90% of stocks are taken through edge guards or gimps. Jigglypuff took advantage of the limited airtime of her competition to achieve total air superiority, resulting in a playstyle that has drawn no shortage of controversy for being reminiscent of camping. At certain spots on a stage, she would basically be untouchable, as her opponent would have to expend what little air mobility options they had, namely their double jump, just to reach her, making for a prime position to attack or defend by placing the onus on her opponent to make the first move. Melee Jigglypuff was the force of nature, not through conventional stats like speed, power, or frame data, at least not entirely. It was through air superiority in a game where few, if any, could come close. Fast forward all the way to Ultimate, however, and things have changed greatly. Puff still retains an impressive display of air movement and air attacks, while multi-jumpers like Kirby, DDD, and Pit have that privilege somewhat cancelled out by their poor lateral movement. Puff has the best of both worlds, multi-jumps and fantastic horizontal mobility. She can easily float from one side of the stage to the other, then back without even touching the ground. This is augmented further by every single one of her aerials, barring her back air, having very long-lasting hitboxes. Factoring in hitbox interpolation, she can extend her effective range by a measurable amount just by moving while attacking. This makes challenging her in the air difficult for anyone without significant disjoints, and even for those with disjoints, Puff can utilize their fluid air movement to maneuver around their hitboxes, albeit with a great deal of effort and patience on her part. Shield punishing her can be surprisingly difficult on account of her drifting back while attacking or forward to cross you up, forcing both Jigglypuff and the opposing player to be extremely aware of their relative position and when it's safe to throw out attacks, since getting whiff punished can lead to potentially stock-ending consequences. On either side, Jigglypuff quite literally lives and dies on edge guarding. In almost all matchups, it's not in her best interest to play neutral too many times, while in some matchups, getting her opponent off stage is the only way she can win against them. Fortunately, she has the right set of tools to shuttle anyone off solid ground, and through the help of version updates, her grounded moves have been made better at doing the same thing, like her forward throw. Though that isn't to say she can't kill you on stage, because no, she certainly can. It's nowhere near as devastating as in Melee, but Rest introduces a powerful X factor that makes it so you have to worry about more than just not getting thrown off stage. A high-risk, high-reward move with a fair bit of ways to set up, tech chasing with Sing, landing up air, or late forward air at min%. So she has a lot of ways to convert into what is basically a KO punch on demand. If it wasn't obvious, Jigglypuff has a lot of ways to f you up, but just like in Melee, it's through non-conventional ways, which is actually the first and foremost reason why she's so unpopular. Trying to play Jigglypuff can be a slow burn, a very slow burn. Unlike the vast majority of good characters who can take matters into their own hands, in almost every circumstance, she's unable to act first, nor does she have any means of pressuring her opponents into acting first either. For instance, a character like Samus generally doesn't want to go first due to her poor approach game and lack of good shield pressure outside of ledge trapping and maybe grabs. She would rather have her opponent act first so she can punish that. In her case, Charge Shot does an excellent job of forcing them to make the first move because they don't want her to get away with charging up neutral B. Jigglypuff's not a zoner, mind you, but she's definitely more of a whiff punisher than a full-on attacker. However, with no way to create a sense of urgency within her opponent, you'll find yourself in a lot of situations where it boils down to a game of chicken. Despite her ground game being much better than it used to be on release, she's no Roy or Terry who can mash on your shield for days. This has been Jigglypuff's first and foremost issue ever since Melee, and a contributing factor to why HBox developed a reputation for being a quote-unquote can't-beat player. That's not him, that's just Jigglypuff. Trying to use aerials to pressure shield can be a bit dodgy for her too. They are safe on shield, -5, -3, pretty good stuff, and again she can make up for her stubby hitboxes by just drifting back after tagging you with them, but she doesn't have a very good air to ground transition. For example, Ryu can land on your shield with Nair, then immediately go for down tilt without worrying about getting out of shield punished. Jigglypuff doesn't have that luxury, so you kind of have to poke at them with aerials and then hope they throw out a laggy up smash and then whiff punish that. She does have Pound, which is a fantastic shield pressure tool, but even though her moves are safe on shield and she can drift away from them, it's so easy to see her coming that players can mentally prepare countermeasures, or, just not shield and instead whiff punish themselves. No one can deny that Puff has good air movement, but air movement is different from air speed. She's not a fast faller, far from it, so going from air to ground is very easy to see coming. Due to this, anyone who chooses to main Jigglypuff will subject themselves to constant, uncompromising defensive and punish-oriented play for their entire career. Experientially speaking, that doesn't fall in line with most players, does it? It's one thing to have a general defensive or turtling connotation to a character's gameplay like Peach or Samus, but at the very least, they have ways to make stuff happen. The need for this playstyle is primarily influenced by two factors. First, her frailty. As the second lightest character in the game, she will explode far earlier than the vast majority. Puff can afford to lose no more than half a dozen neutral interactions most of the time. Heavyweights like Bowser and K. Rool can afford to be reckless on account of surviving probably double what Jigglypuff can. What kills Bowser at 150 will kill her at 75, maybe less. What's more, her lightweight isn't compensated by enough practical tools to let the player overcome those deficiencies through skill. For example, Game & Watch is a light character but has some of the most egregious hitboxes in the game, and ironically, incredible defensive tools like the best out of shield option of all time that doubles as one of the singular best recovery moves in the game and as anti-zoning tools in the form of Bucket. Fox and Sheik are also light, but they can overwhelm you with raw speed and frame data. Sephiroth dies in 2 hits, but has more range in 1 attack than 3 of Jigglypuffs stacked on top of each other. She has tremendous air mobility and multi-jumps, but when graded on a 1-to-1 scale with the other characters, it doesn't alleviate how punishing it is to mess up on her. She's relatively fair in terms of damage, range, and kill power, not particularly fast in terms of frame data, and not particularly strong outside of a singular YOLO move that, if you miss, is as bad as getting shield broken. Oh yeah, speaking of shield broken, Jigglypuff literally explodes if her shield is broken. It's not like you can shield at 0% and even if you get popped, you're only going to take 30% at most. She just dies off the top. Something else that exacerbates her frailty is her air dodge. Typically lightweight characters, CSS, Fox, Pichu, Sheik, Squirtle, what have you, all have frame 2 air dodges, while Mythra and Bayo cheat with Foresight and Bad with them respectively, meaning they can escape even slightly untrue combos. To casual players, being off by 1 or 2 frames may not seem like that big of a difference, but it actually is. It's why comboing a heavy character like Bowser feels so much easier than comboing a Little Mac. On the flip side, most characters with frame 4 air dodges are heavyweights who can withstand a lot of punishment. The only two that feel somewhat unfair are Ike and Snake, who aren't quite heavy enough to offset a laggy air dodge, but Snake has grenades, which is a frame 1 combo break. Oh, I'm sorry, did I say Ike and Snake? There's one more character with a frame 4 air dodge. Yep, her. Jigglypuff, the second lightest character in the game, has a frame 4 air dodge for no discernible reason. For someone who dies in 3 hits and has no way to break out of combos outside of a Hail Mary rest out of hit stun, not having a frame 2 air dodge hurts a lot. Second, the competition. What made Melee more favorable for her, despite being a much faster game, is that almost every tournament viable character was a brawler or a close-range fighter. Having more than 3 times the roster size of Melee, Ultimate's character pool greatly expanded upon the non-brawler categories. We have a ton more fighters with long-range weaponry like Duck Hunt, the Belmonts, Lucario, Villager, Hero, Olimar, Mega Man, tons of new trappers or trapper hybrids like Snake, Steve, Piranha Plant, Pac-Man, Rob, and lots of new mid-range fighters. Back in the day, she only had to worry about Marth and maybe Link. Now we have Cloud, Corrin, Aegis, Lucina, Sephiroth, Game & Watch, Shulk, Byleth, Sora, Ike, Min, and even the new close-range fighters can tear into her like Joker, Terry, the newly upgraded Roy, Diddy Kong, ZSS, Palutena, Pokemon Trainer, and Sonic. To clarify, I'm not saying Jigglypuff loses to all of them. The point of me mentioning all those new fighters is to explain how they raise the ceiling on a character's effective range and avenues of pressure that only serve to make it harder for Jigglypuff to do her job. Ground responses to the air have significantly increased in number and efficiency. Disjoints or invincible upper bodies on up smashes are pretty much ubiquitous now. Universal frame 3 jump squats make rising aerials more effective now than ever. so even in matchups that Puff wins, all it takes is one good response and she explodes into a million pieces. There's a very sharp learning curve to playing her because you have to be hyper aware of and learn how to handle every single character's threat bubbles. Technically, it would benefit any fighter to learn about threat bubbles and ranges, but for Jigglypuff it's even more so. She dies in 2 hits and has no means of safely applying pressure without exposing herself. In other words, she's more stressful than other glass cannons without producing the same reward as them. The entire basis of her gameplay revolves around air superiority. The intent is for her to have the advantage when fighting someone else in the air, owing to her multi-jumps, great aerials, and fluid air physics, but outside of edge guarding or wall of pain situations, it doesn't always feel like she has air superiority. Even those without very much conventional range like Joker, Ness, Mario, ZSS, and Yoshi can respond to her very effectively in air-to-air combat, or at the very least are really hard to whiff punish in light of comparable air movement and also have faster frame data. She's in a really weird situation when it comes to exploiting weak points. Against stubbier characters, the good ones anyway, whiff punishing them can be difficult since they can mash harder than her, plus they're harder to edge guard where Puff is at her best. Against characters that can be edge guarded super easily like Cloud, Ike, Aegis and such, getting them off stage in the first place is a dangerous undertaking. Their ability to hold center stage and set up a wall of death forces her to take the initiative, which, as mentioned in the beginning, is an option she's ill-equipped to handle. Granted, sorties are ironically more whiff punishable due to higher end lag on their moves overall, so if you catch them getting too trigger happy on swinging moves, you can wait for an opening to get right in on them. But that danger will always be there. All in all, the main reason she has a hard time gaining attention is that her polarizing aspects are polarizing in the wrong ways. No one can dispute that she has some of the best edge guarding in the game, but that gets hindered by not having a means to force opponents into a situation to easily get them off stage. She doesn't have a Samus neutral to bait opponents into approaching her and then a long tether grab to backthrow them off stage. She has to get in on them. Essentially, the ball is always in your court, which can get mentally exhausting when you don't have many ways to serve it really hard back at them. That being said, as demonstrated by the best Puff player in the world, the improvements to her moveset throughout Ultimate's update history have more than aided her in reaching semi-viable status. She began Ultimate as a virtual bottom tier just like Smash 4 and Brawl, but now most people consider her a solid mid tier. While not enough to fully cancel out her weaknesses, she received excellent quality of life improvements to make things a bit more forgiving. For example, back air got buffed a ton, frame 10 instead of frame 12, and went from -6 to -3. Her combo tools are made more efficient, like down air's drill setup, Cotton getting more hits done and shield pressure, down throw and jab 1-2 having less unlag for more follow-ups, and her forward throw launch angle was adjusted to make throwing opponents off stage a lot easier. These combinations of buffs made her punish game extremely devastating. The onus is still on the Puff player to find that opening, and she still gets blown to hell if you mess up, but the reward factor is much better for when you do manage to win neutral. I think in totality, half of what makes her unpopular stems from the playstyle necessitated by her, and the other half is a lack of practical tools. She received more practical tools, but that playstyle aspect is still holding her down. And it may do so until the end of time, unless Sakurai goes crazy and gives her a projectile. I feel like she's a solid mid-tier character, good strengths, but not quite enough to overcome all the weaknesses through skill. I will say that the current meta shifting to a more defensive, punish-oriented playstyle will benefit her over time though. Anyways, that's gonna be it for today. If you enjoyed the video, it would be great if you left a like and subscribed. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Vars, join my Discord server, and check out my other Why No One Plays episodes if you haven't yet. But for now, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.